And these two things kind of hit simultaneously, but the first one is fear. Like, it's just this overwhelming, like, oh my gosh, I have this wow sense of responsibility all of a sudden. I have to provide, I have to take care of someone. I have like such a thing there. And it's also joy.
Welcome to the Focus on the Family broadcast, helping families thrive.
Hey, here's some of the influences of a father. And sometimes we talk about how important moms are. And I think we all in our hearts, we know it. We know moms are important. And so for you moms, well done, keep it going. But it's important for dads to be engaged with their kids. Let me just rattle off some of the stats. Children with fathers who are involved in their lives, that's an important factor, do better academically. They're less likely to abuse substances. Adolescents with more involved fathers are twice as likely to go to college, 75% less likely to have a child in their teen years, 80% less likely to be incarcerated, and half as likely to struggle with depression. And I just want to point those benefits out because we can get on dads. We're aloof, we're distant, and that is true at times. I mean, we compartmentalize and we're not always there at the moment. But an engaged father is powerful to the family, and that's what we want to encourage moms and dads with today. Dads, let's get going and let's make sure we're doing the job we need to do. And with that, Rob, let me welcome you to Focus on the Family.
Thank you, Jim. It's so good to be here.
Okay, I painted kind of that important picture, but you give your overview to it. What motivated you to do the perfect dad?
Well, I saw this article about an NFL player. This is probably 5-10 years ago, but it's like, this would be the perfect quarterback. The perfect quarterback would have Aaron Rodgers' arm and Tom Brady's playbook and Peyton Manning's head and Tim Tebow's heart. And if you could somehow like Frankenstein a quarterback in a lab, like that's the perfect quarterback.
For the Broncos, we need that guy.
Right, I know. And so I thought the same sort of thing is true about a dad. Like a dad has this list of jobs that they have to do that are like, they have to be a coach. Like as a dad, it's like, oh, you can coach your kid's team, or they have to be a teacher. Like, oh, dad, you should know all the answers to homework. Or they have to be a pastor. Like, hey, dad, I'm having a spiritual crisis. What do I do with that? So I thought there are these 12 jobs of being a dad. And there are more than that, but I've kind of listed out 12 primary ones. And I thought if you could kind of nail all of those and Frankenstein someone together, you would have the perfect dad.
And typically that list is coming from your wife.
Yes.
That's something, that's kind of understood,
Gentle
right?
suggestion.
Yeah, here's a list of how you could be a better dad.
Exactly.
That is common, though, and I want you to speak to that, how we have a little bit of conflict sometimes in our marriages because we're not being the fathers we need to be. What advice do you have to the spouse, the wife, about moving your husband along in a more productive way?
Well, I think every guy is going to have things that he's talented at naturally, and there's going to be things that are like, oh, I need to grow in this area that I grow. So I think maybe start with the strengths, like start with the positive and build on something versus like, why don't you ever do this? Why aren't you good enough in this? And like, we think those things, and especially if we had a dad who did that so well. Like for me in my house, like I'm the bad handyman. Like if the
okay, me and you both.
Yes, like, if the garbage disposal breaks, if the dishwasher breaks, it's like, okay, my wife knows like that's going to be lower in my weaknesses. But there are lots of things that like, okay, I'm the guy who will read to my kids. I'm the guy who will play in the backyard. And so there are strengths. And so start with those strengths and then start working towards the weaknesses as well.
Why do you think we as dads are so insecure?
I think some of it, I think, is biology. I think a mom gets a natural kind of 9 months gestation period of like growing close to the baby. And like when my wife tells me the first time she told me she's pregnant, it's in theory for me, I'm like, okay,
right.
Like I know that, but my body doesn't feel different. I don't feel any different. And so she's grown close to the baby in a way that I can't. By the time the baby's born, I feel, and even in the birthing process, you're kind of sitting on the back row like, all right, honey, good job. Here's some ice chips. And you just feel like you're on the sideline. So by the time the baby's born, it can kind of create that culture of like, well, I'm the second parent. I'm the second most important parent.
You're the support team.
Exactly. I'm the
That's
backup
interesting.
quarterback.
Yeah.
And so I think that happens and it makes dads kind of naturally lean away.
I agree with you. I could feel that. Did you feel that?
There were plenty of seasons where I felt
Plenty of seasons. Are you a football season guy?
No,
or
I'm just
what?
thinking about the different stages of life. I think it's very accurate.
What about that first time you became a dad? I think all of us as fathers, we remember that. It's very poignant. And you've done this 4 times now with your
Yeah.
daughters. But what was that first time like?
I think the first time there's two fears that come across a man's face when he learns he's pregnant. And these two things kind of hit simultaneously, but the first one is fear. Like it's just this overwhelming, like, oh my gosh, I have this wow sense of responsibility all of a sudden. I have to provide. I have to take care of someone. I have like such a thing there. And it's also joy.
Now, Sarah, she did a French degree.
Yes.
You're having maybe your fourth child or your third girl? I can't remember
Yes.
what it was. And she had to complete that. I found that hilarious how she and why she had to complete her French degree, which meant what for you?
So this was actually our very first kid. She had gone 3 straight summers to New York University in Paris, and so she had to finish her French degree, go for the whole summer, and so the baby's 9 months old, and she's like, I'm going to leave the baby with Rob for the summer. And then all of our friends are like, you're leaving the baby with Rob?
Do you know what every mom just hearing that said? You did what?
I know.
This is like a bad film script
Yeah.
here.
I know.
But
Like,
she did.
She did. She's like, no, he's a man, he's a father, he's capable of it. And I'll never forget this moment in the airport. I'm holding baby Juliana. I'm looking at it and I say, okay, goodbye, honey. I was like, this is going to be a lot of fun. I'm babysitting for the next 3 weeks. And she looks at me and she says, Rob, it's not called babysitting. And I said, well, what's it called? And she's like, it's called being a father.
She sorted you out there.
And it just burned in me. Like I realized that of like, oh, this is me. This is my job I'm on. So I had that kind of month where it was just me and the baby.
Rob, I was kind of shocked by this stat. Compared to 30 years ago, families and working folks are working about 11 hours more per week to make ends meet.
Yeah.
How does a young couple with kids, how do they do this? I mean, you and your wife have had to do it.
Yeah, I think it takes more of a community support system. Like for a while, we've had parents who lived in the same town with us who helped with that. We live in Austin, Texas now, and so we have friends who come and help out with the kids and different things like that. And so it's taken more of a village to kind of rally around us and do that. It also takes a lot of communication of like, okay, I'm going to pick up the baby from preschool here, and I'm going to drop off the kids to, practice over here. And so it takes a lot more communication there. And it can also lead to conflict and miscommunication and that sort of stuff of like, well, I thought you were doing this and I thought this was your role. So the roles get a little more blurred just because you're literally both working.
Yeah.
Dual income is so much more common now. And so it takes much more conversation. It takes communication of like, hey, what are our roles? What are our expectations?
It's so true. Right now, Jean and I are helping a young man who has struggled and has 2 children. And we're just trying to help them with an apartment and kind of getting on their feet again.
Yeah.
I'm seeing probably for the first time through the eyes of a single parent, whether that be a mom or a dad, it is daunting. And I don't know that there's enough support. That's where getting plugged into a church and, I mean, just to get childcare coverage. And I'm not sure how he's going to do it. And we're going to do all we can to help, but he needs like 5 or 6 of us to be able to pull that through. Have you given some thought to that single parent? They're listening too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are all these roles that you kind of need in a kid's life, and it's not just, hey, I have to take all this on myself. I have to do this all. It is really like, it's why investing in friendships are important. It's why even if you're don't have kids yet, it's why investing in other people who have kids, or if your kids have grown up, it's like it takes all of us taking care of each other for this to really happen. And when you're a single parent, it takes all the more strategy, it takes all the more planning, it takes all the more like looking for resources that are out there. And really, like, I do think plugging into a good church, plugging into a community that's like, hey, I see your situation. At my church at home, there's a single dad, 2 kids, twin kids, 9 months old. And so I've done things like Sarah and I have taken them into the park or different things like that to just help out and be a friend to them in that sort of way.
With all these demands on you, have you organized your goals and priorities? I mean, you look down the future with 4 girls. You've got weddings, you've got college education.
Well, it's amazing. Every time I go to the grocery store, this probably happens once a month, I'll take all 4 girls to the grocery store. So they're like, I have an 11-year-old, 9-year-old, 6-year-old, and 3-year-old. So they're kind of hanging off me.
It's a
they're
party.
Running around. Oh, dude, it's incredible. And so we're running all around. And then every time someone will look at me and say, oh man, I hope you're dusting off a shotgun to fend off those boys. And then the one guy will look at me and say, oh, I hope you're saving up for all those weddings. And so it is crazy hearing that from strangers, people that you just meet in the grocery store, what sort of expectation that puts on you of like, oh, wow, I have to save up for 4 different weddings. I have to, save up for these things. So for me, I think it's just like, okay, one kid at a time, taking simple goals, doing those sort of things, and not letting it be so daunting. If you would have told me 10 years ago I would have had 4 daughters, I would have said, get out, get behind me.
Does
like,
that
I don't
include a
believe
cool
it.
washcloth for your forehead as
Yes.
you think about these things?
Goodness.
Now, you and Sarah, you have made the decision. I think Sarah's at home with the kids.
Yes.
And with 4 now, that becomes, I think, a very wise decision. But
Yeah.
it puts pressure on you financially. How do you prioritize those things? How do you say, okay, we're going to have to live on less?
Yeah, I think for us, it's been like, okay, we're going to have to cut down like what are needs versus wants. And really just like, hey, we're going to do a trip to the park and pack lunch versus like going out for dinner, just different things like that of like, really our family is our investment. Sarah's grandpa has 6 kids, and he would say, you can have a family or you can have money. You can kind of choose.
That's true.
That was his thing. And so it's like, okay, my investment really is my kids and our family. And it's also been like, okay, I'm going to do little things for our family. I'm a freelance writer, and so I'll take on extra writing jobs and that sort of stuff. And when I do those things, it's not like, oh, I'm trying to get money. It's like, I'm saving up college. I'm saving up wedding funds. I'm kind of doing those really as an act of love of like, this is
Sure.
my way to invest in my daughters.
And I've never heard, a guy that's on his deathbed that's, 80 years old say, I regret having children.
Right.
At that point, you're saying, I'm so grateful my family's around me. And when you look at life, that's really critical. I love the fact in your book, The Perfect Dad, you talk about the adventuresome spirit that fathers should bring to
Yeah.
this. And you had a trip to Disneyland that went a little crazy.
Yes.
I think we can all relate to that, but yours was exceptionally crazy. What happened?
So, had these different jobs I was trying to do. I think being an adventurer for your kids, like really making those memories is so important.
Right.
I remember the adventures my dad took me on. So I was like, okay, we're going to do like the ultimate American trip, which is that trip to Disney. So we had the kids save up for a year. We kind of saved up for all the rides. We were really excited about it, took the minivan, and we were in that part of Utah where like if aliens landed, like they would land in this part because it's so desolate.
Area
so,
51 and a half.
Exactly. It was just like desert, nothing else, like barely any cell phone service, that sort of stuff. And so all of a sudden I hear this click, and then I was like, oh, what was that? And then our speedometer all of a sudden starts flashing back and forth. All the lights on our car start flashing. And then our car goes boom, and stops in the middle of the desert. And so I was like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? So I get on the phone, call the insurance. They send out a tow truck. And the tow truck driver gets there and he's like, oh, I can't fit all 5 of you into my tow truck. He's like, I can only fit 3 of you. And I was like, well, how far away are we from town? He's like, oh, about 45 minutes. And so I was like, what do we do? And so I had this decision. I was like, do I get in the tow truck with him and drive into town and leave my wife and daughter stranded on the side of the road? Or do we stay on the side of the road and then send them into town?
Let's think for a minute. Oh, send your wife
Right.
with the car.
Right answer.
And so I was like, okay. I sent her with the tow truck driver, and I'll never forget this look. She gets in the tow truck and kind of looks at me like, are you sure this is okay?
It's like a Twilight Zone.
It totally was. It was like this, right? And so she shuts the door, and then as soon as she shut the door, I had this eerie feeling like something's wrong. And so all of a sudden, I'm texting her, I'm calling her like, hey, is everything okay? And then my phone dies. My car's dead. I have no battery. And then the sheriff ends up driving up, and he's like, hey, are you okay? Is everything okay there? And I was like, yeah, we had a tow truck that came. And he's like, oh, the tow truck already came? And I was like, yeah. And I was like, yeah, he took my wife and kids. And he's like, you sent your wife and kids with the tow truck?
You idiot.
Yeah, no. I was like, yeah. I was like, is that a problem? And he looks at me. He's like, it's probably fine. And then he gets in the car and he takes off. And so then all of a sudden, I'm just totally frightened.
Now, how are
out.
you going to get back to town?
Well,
why didn't he give you a ride?
He I don't know. He got a call on his radio, and then he's like, oh, I got to go check this. And I'm not thinking straight. I didn't know what happened. So
I mean, you're standing on the side of the road with no vehicle.
Standing on the side of the road in Utah, in the desert,
Truly an adventure.
100-degree day. I was like, this is a true adventure.
Now, is Disneyland still in front of you or behind you?
Disneyland is in front of us, so we're on our way. Like, this story is just getting started. Well, and I'm thinking, we're, like I said, we don't have a lot of money, so I'm like, okay, we're going to spend our whole Disneyland budget to fix this car. And so then the tow truck driver finally comes and gets me, and he's like, oh, we're going to go to Bernie's instead. Like the shop you were supposed to go to, they have a 2-day wait. So he's like, I'm just going to take you to Bernie's. And so I was like, all of a sudden I was like, what is this situation that I've gotten myself into? I was like, this is what they do to poor dads who don't know how to fix their cars. They take them to the side shop out there, and then he's going to, fleece me. And so he takes me to this like little garage looking thing. Wife and kids are there. Everything's great. We all hug each other. And then we sit there for about 3 hours. And then he's like, okay, the car's fixed. And so I was like, all right, how much is it going to be? And he's like, seems like you're having a really hard day, so we're just going to charge you $45. And it was the Good Samaritan story in a way I've never experienced it. I was like, $45?
What was it?
It was the serpentine belt, and it did a few different damages and that sort of stuff, and that's what it was.
That's cheap.
And so he just did it for as cheap as he could, just less than the part was worth. And he's like, I just want to really take care of you guys. And
Wow.
I just got all like misty, gave this guy a hug, and I was like, you saved our vacation to Disneyland. Thank you.
That is, hey, shout out to whoever that was in Utah. If you're listening, way to go.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Hey, Rob, now I did mention the question about whether you have a female dog or pet in the home with 4 daughters and your wife. Did you buy a female pet?
We have a female dog as well.
I'm telling you guys.
That was amazing that you said that.
It's 100%. I don't know why this is. I've never met the opposite, where a poor guy gets a male dog as the family pet.
We had the dog first, and then I was like, okay, we're going to start having boys now, and it did not turn out
I think
like
it just
that.
keeps the universe in balance. It's one of God's favorite plans. You, with all 4 girls, I mean, you and your wife, Sarah, you talk about how we're going to train these girls up to be wonderful daughters of the Lord. So how does discipline enter into your family? How do you go about that as the perfect dad?
Yeah, I think discipline, it's kind of 2 things. One, it's disciplining your kids, and 2, there's always these little violations that happen with your girls or your kids where something happens and she did it, no, I did it. And so
That
it's
happens
like
in your home?
all the time. It's probably happening right now at home.
Right.
And so it really is both of those things. And so that's what we had a lot of conversations about. And so for us, it's both positive and negative discipline. And so there's the positive discipline, which really is we want to create a culture in our home of noticing when our kids do something right.
That is so important.
And so it's like, oh, great job. Thank you for helping with the dishes. Oh, you helped your sister with that coloring. Thank you. And so just really looking out for those things versus like reacting to why didn't you do this? And so we try to do 3 positives for every negative. It doesn't always work like that.
Share an example of how you've done that. And not so much the positive, but maybe the negative as well.
Well, the other thing with the negative is we have really clear expectations. And so we say, these are the rules. So we do that in the calm times. What I found early on was there'd be something going on, and then you would kind of snap and say, hey, don't do that, don't do this. And so we're like, okay, we need to back up and slow down and say, hey, these are the first expectations. So the first one is there's a warning. Like, okay, this is your warning of what's going on. The second one is this is what the consequence is going to be. And then the third one is the consequence itself. And it's age appropriate for a 3-year-old. It looks different than an 11-year-old, but it can be a loss of dessert or loss of screen time or that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But by the time it happens, it's not a surprise. It's still tense there, but it's like, hey, you knew this was going on and you know this is better. And for me, the other thing about discipline isn't about the rules. Discipline is about teaching the behavior that we want to impart to our kids.
And that's so good.
Hey, this is what we're trying to do, Juliana. This is what we're trying to do, Claire. These are the conversations that we have. I'm not trying to punish you arbitrarily. The reason is, but like you have to be honest and tell the truth. And if you can't do that, that's going to hurt you later in life.
Well, that's really important. What are those 5 rules that you deploy in your home?
So we have 5 rules. They're more like guidelines, values, that sort of thing. But the first one is be kind and don't yell.
How's that going?
Man.
That's a tough one, but it's a good one.
It's something, the reason we made it our first rule is like with sisters, it's like I'm learning this, but it's amazing how quickly the volume can escalate,
Yes.
how quickly the snapping can happen. And so we're like, okay, but it's really important for us to instill that value in our girls of like, your sister is one of the best friends that you're ever going to have. Love her, cherish her. And so really be kind. Don't yell at each other.
That's sweet, but I thought the first one might be you only get 10 minutes in the bathroom.
Well,
With 5 girls in your house, that might be a better one.
that's coming. Once they're teenagers, pray for me. And so,
All right, number 2.
so my number 2 rule is we say that be responsible. Responsibility is a big deal. And so for us, it's age appropriate. So it's chores and homework is that sort of thing that's really a big deal for us. We want to make sure, like, hey, you have these responsibilities and you should learn to do those. Like, if you can learn to own your responsibilities when you're young, as you get older, as you get jobs, as you get families of your own, it'll help you, those responsibilities not seem so burdensome.
That's so true. Number 3 you said is eat what is served.
Yes.
That goes down well in anybody's house, really. That's
Honor
important.
the cook.
Yeah.
Honor the cook.
Yeah, eat what's served. It's just, it's amazing with kids. Like, you put food in front of them and how much they push back and say, no, I don't want this. I don't like this. And so we really try to teach that in our own home. And then when we go to grandma's house, or we go to a friend's house, it's like someone's serving us something. So we're grateful for that.
That's fun. Number 4 is have fun every week. That's a great one.
Yeah.
How do you
fun.
guys do that?
We try to do like some sort of family outing or a family movie night or something like that, but we plan something during the week that it's like, hey, we're going to look forward to
So
this.
you do a build-up.
Yeah, we do a
with
build-up
the
to it.
kids.
Yeah, and so
it's coming Friday night.
Yeah, Friday night we're gonna do ice cream night, or we're gonna do pizza night, or family night, but just something where it's like. And I wanted one of the rules to be something that was fun and positive, so all the rules weren't finger wagging like do this, don't do this, but it was like, hey, we're gonna have fun. That's a rule in our house.
So you don't say we're going to do ice cream night, but you know what? Ice cream is so bad for you.
Right.
I don't know why we're doing it.
Right, exactly.
We'll serve tofu ice cream.
Right.
Tofu is good. And then the last one, the 5th one, be honest. That's a beautiful one for a household guideline or rule.
Yeah.
So is that broken down, or has that been relatively easy to deploy?
I'm amazed how honest my kids are, actually. I'm amazed how much when we'll confront them about something or ask about a grade or ask about something that happened, they're really straightforward and honest about it.
Yeah, and those are great spiritual tools that you're developing in your girls. Mm-hmm. So you've been a youth pastor. You've been around kids your entire life, it sounds like. So you've seen firsthand some of that brokenness that kids come from in their homes. And you're trying to provide, I'm sure, a better environment, obviously, for your own daughters. But what have you learned from that environment, being a youth pastor, seeing broken homes where maybe there's been failure? What are some of those big lessons you take away?
I mean, when I was a young youth pastor, assistant youth pastor, we would do different kind of prayers at the end of the night, different messages. And there was no prayer where students would come up for prayer more than, hey, who here has been hurt by your dad or has had a broken relationship with your dad? When you say that in a youth meeting, every hand goes up.
Every hand.
And it's amazing to me, I think because dads have so much authority and power, and that relationship is so easy to be frayed. And so I remember being, 20 years old, seeing that happen, and just not blaming the dads, but just asking myself, like, okay, if I ever have that opportunity to have kids, how am I going to do better? Mm-hmm. And it was, for me, just a warning sign of like, all right, I have to take this job really seriously because it can be so hurtful if it goes wrong.
Yeah. Rob, some dads are hearing this and they're saying, I haven't been a good father. Some are listening right now, and it may not be that extreme. It may be you're just so occupied with the provision part of your responsibility, building your career, doing all you can do to make sure the family is taken care of. We can justify that as dads and husbands, Look how hard I'm working for us. Right. Don't you see that? What do you say to that father when their kids are crying out for him?
Well, I do think the provision thing, like I said at the beginning, it's such a weight that's where all of our energy and attention goes first. And it's what we feel more naturally inclined to. Men find their identities in their careers. And so it's like, okay, that's what I'm going to do and that's what I'm going to bring. But I would say to that dad, it's never too late. I talked to a dad who read my book and he was crying, kind of having that same conversation. My kids are old, they're grown up. There's been a lot of brokenness there. And I was like, man, texts, phone calls, emails are easy to send. Yeah. And it's amazing what little steps can bring healing to. Yeah. And so if you're listening to this right now, if you're going through it and like, I missed it. My kids aren't young anymore. It's broken there. I believe Jesus heals these relationships. I believe God's a God of redemption. And I believe that those relationships can be healed between you and your kids.
And reach out to them.
Absolutely.
Even if they're adult children out of the home. Send them a text today. I love you. I'm sorry I missed so much. That's a relatively simple thing to do. Rob, I so appreciate your heart for fathering, and your book, The Perfect Dad, is a great resource, very practical to give us handles, and that's important for us fathers. Make it simple. Rob, thank you so much for pouring into your daughters and your wife and your family as an example of what it means to be maybe not the perfect dad, but darn close. So thanks for being with us.
Thank you guys. This was fun.
Hey, I'm John Fuller, and thanks for watching. Get more info about Focus over here and more from our guests over there, and be sure to subscribe to our channel as well.